The morning sun spilled over the rolling hills of my family's ranch like molten gold. Dew still sparkled on the wild grass as I walked the fence line, coffee in hand, watching my two horses, Valor and Liberty, gallop toward the pond at the base of the ridge. Their hoofs kicked up soft sprays of earth as they ran unrestrained, joyous, alive. They reached the pond, splashed into the shallows, and began their ritual, rolling, snorting, and pawing at the cool water like a pair of overgrown, playful dogs. I smiled. After years of deployments and hardened landscapes, the stillness of this land had become my sanctuary. We'd moved here 6 months ago. A deliberate choice to live on the edge of a suburban development called Briar Ridge, a place where manicured lawns met open country. Technically, my property didn't fall under their HOA jurisdiction. But proximity, as I was about to learn, has its own pitfalls. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel before I saw her, Karen Dufresne, the self-anointed queen of Briar Ridge, HOA president, code enforcer, self-proclaimed community protector. She stood at the border of her domain, hands on hips, sunglasses gleaming like twin mirrors of disapproval. Even from across the fence, I could feel her eyes narrowing at the sight of my horses in the pond. I set my mug on the fence post and waited. Right on cue, she marched down the slope, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Mr. Rourke," she called out, as if I were a child caught scribbling on the walls. "We need to talk." I turned. "Morning, Karen." Her lips pursed. "Your livestock is in violation of Section 1-B. No agricultural use within 100 feet of community water sources." I blinked. "That pond's on my land. It's connected to a protected runoff channel," she argued. "Technically, it's a shared water resource." I held back a smirk. "It's a natural pond, fed by a spring under my west field. Always has been." Karen clicked her pen aggressively. "I've had it tested. There are mineral traces that flow downstream into our irrigation system, and your animals are contaminating it." I looked over at Valor, who was now blowing bubbles with his nose, while Liberty flicked a tail at a dragonfly. "They're not livestock," I said carefully. "They're federally trained mounts, temporary guests under official permission." Karen's eyebrows lifted so high they nearly vanished under her visor. "Federal U.S. Marshals," I said. "Special terrain pursuit horses. They're resting between assignments." She scoffed, scribbling faster. "Well, that doesn't exempt you from community environmental standards. You'll receive a warning notice. If this continues, I'll be forced to escalate." "Escalate? To who?" I asked. Karen didn't answer. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, like a storm cloud retreating across a prairie. The next morning, the warning notice was taped to my gate in bold red letters. 2 days later came a second letter, this time citing potential fines, water contamination reports, and something she called environmental aggression. The wording was absurd. The threats were real. But I wasn't about to let a suburban warlord bully me off my own land. I had paperwork, federal clearance, authorization for the horse's stay. I made a few phone calls to the agency. They assured me they'd handle it if it went any further. It did. On a bright Tuesday afternoon, while I was fixing a rail on the southern fence, I heard sirens. 2 patrol cars kicked up dust as they sped up my long driveway and skidded to a stop outside the barn. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. One carried a clipboard, the other a radio. "Sir," the lead officer said, "we received a formal complaint from a member of the Briar Ridge HOA. Something about illegal livestock access to protected water." I crossed my arms. "You've got to be kidding me." Before they could respond, Valor neighed loudly from the pond, as if mocking the absurdity of it all. The officer glanced toward the horses. "Are they yours?" "Technically, no," I said. "They belong to the U.S. Marshals." That's when a third vehicle arrived. Sleek, matte black, government plates. 2 men stepped out, one in a suit, the other in tactical gear. The suited one flashed a badge. "Special Agent Miles, U.S. Marshals Service." The cops froze. Karen, who had just arrived on foot, arms swinging in fury, and her eyes froze to. Agent Miles turned toward her and asked calmly, "Ma'am, are you the one who filed the complaint?" Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I did. I have footage." They're violating their federal assets under our protection, Miles interrupted. And you've just triggered a federal investigation into interference. With active operations, Karen's face drained of color as I watched her stumble backward, silent for once. I sipped my coffee and smiled. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The dust hadn't even settled from the marshal's SUV when Karen started yelling. "This is outrageous," she shrieked, storming across the gravel like a wind-up toy on overdrive. "They're animals, not agents." Agent Miles didn't flinch. He remained calm, measured. "Ma'am, interfering with federally assigned mounts is a serious offense. These horses are not pets, they're active government property under protective protocols," Karen sputtered. "You can't seriously expect me to believe that horses are what part of a tactical unit." "You don't have to believe it," I cut in, stepping beside him. "But you do have to back off." Karen's nostrils flared. "This isn't over. The HOA has rights. You can't just do whatever you want because you think you're above the law." "I'm not above the law," I replied evenly. "I just know how it works." Her face twisted like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back toward her pristine community, where the hedges were square and the rules were gospel. The local deputies stood awkwardly near their cruisers, suddenly unsure of their role in the drama. Agent Miles approached them and exchanged quiet words. Handing over documentation, she called in an environmental hazard. One officer said, scratching his head. "She can call in Bigfoot for all I care," Miles replied. She submitted drone footage of federal assets without clearance. "If she pushes this, she'll be explaining her hobby to a federal judge." That got their attention. The officers apologized, then backed out slowly. I didn't blame them. They'd been caught in Karen's web and weren't eager to tangle with it again. After everyone left, I stood in the shade of the barn and watched the horizon. Valor and Liberty grazed by the pond, utterly unaware they'd become the center of a suburban Cold War. That night, the air felt different, still heavy. Then I saw it, a blinking red light near the fence line. A drone. Karen was back. She was filming my horses again. I stood silently in the dark, recording it with my phone. Let her think she was documenting violations. I was building a case of my own. Over the next few days, Karen escalated her campaign. She began flooding the HOA message boards with warnings about unauthorized government activity and classified animals contaminating community resources. She called for an emergency HOA board meeting to vote on increased surveillance along the fence. Cameras, signs, even motion sensors. I didn't attend the meeting, but I heard it all. Through my neighbor, Jake, a quiet Vietnam vet with no love for HOA drama. "Karen's losing it." He chuckled over the fence. "Said your horses are radioactive. Wouldn't surprise me if she thinks they're cyborgs," I muttered. Jake leaned in, words getting around. "Not everyone in the HOA is buying her act anymore. People are embarrassed. They're starting to ask questions." That was my opening. I contacted Agent Miles again, explained what was happening. He wasn't pleased. "She's not just being annoying anymore," he said. "She's interfering with a federal operation. These horses are part of a wider effort. We've got a fugitive case pending. If she compromises their health or mobility, she compromises national safety, then it's time to draw a line." Agreed. By the weekend, Karen received a formal cease and desist letter from the U.S. Marshals Service. It was short, direct, and terrifying. But predictably, she didn't back down. Instead, she doubled her efforts, hiring a private environmental expert to conduct unauthorized soil tests near the pond. She distributed flyers to every house in the subdivision with a picture of Valor and Liberty under the bold headline, "Dangerous Animals on the Loose. Act Now." It would have been funny if it wasn't so desperate. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was past midnight when the alert came through on my motion sensors. The security camera feed showed Karen in a hoodie, fumbling with the latch on the horse gate. She was trying to release them. It wasn't just harassment anymore, it was criminal. I called Agent Miles. Within minutes, a black SUV was speeding down my driveway again. This time, no calm explanations, no gentle warnings. Karen was caught on camera trespassing, attempting to release government property. and endangering federally protected animals, tied to an ongoing investigation. They cuffed her on the spot. She didn't even argue, just stared at me with a blank, rattled expression. As they drove away with her in the back seat, Jake stepped out onto his porch in slippers, coffee in hand. "Guess the queen just got dethroned," he said. I looked out at the quiet pasture. The horses still standing strong. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through Briar Ridge like a thunderclap in a church service stopped by morning. Footage of her being loaded into the back of the marshal's SUV was already circulating through private neighborhood group chats and Facebook pages. It didn't take long for the gossip mill to grind her reputation into dust. For someone who built her authority on fear and rigid control, public disgrace was the one punishment she couldn't endure quietly. But Karen wasn't the type to disappear after one defeat. Barely 2 days after her release pending charges, she filed a formal grievance against me with the county zoning board. Her complaint that my ranch posed a national security risk to adjacent residential communities. The irony was too rich. At the same time, she began calling emergency HOA meetings weekly, each more paranoid than the last. She ranted about federal overreach, claimed my horses were biologically enhanced assets, and accused me of operating a covert military surveillance post under the guise of a pond. Even the HOA board started to squirm under the weight of her hysteria. I watched all of this unfold with a quiet kind of patience, the kind learned from years in the field, where timing was everything, and reaction was often more powerful than attack. But I wasn't idle. That with Agent Miles' help, I compiled a full report detailing Karen's trespassing, unauthorized drone surveillance, defamation, and attempted interference with federal assets. I also included statements from 2 neighbors and camera footage from the night she tried to open the horse gate. The U.S. Marshals filed it as part of their case, but I made sure to send a copy to the county as well. And just like that, the narrative began to shift. Residents who once nodded along with Karen's commands started whispering doubts in community meetings. Some questioned how she obtained HOA funds to pay for environmental testing. Others raised concerns about her accessing surveillance footage from cameras she'd had installed without proper board votes. Then came the petition. It started small, just a few signatures at first, passed around discreetly by Jake and 2 other longtime residents. But by the end of the week, it had enough names to force a vote of no confidence. The motion: Karen Dufresne is to be removed from the HOA presidency, effective immediately. Karen's response: she tried to cancel the vote, but she had lost her grip when the HOA board refused to support her. She locked herself in the community clubhouse the night before the vote and tried to delete neighborhood records from the shared computer. She didn't know I'd already handed over everything she'd done to the county ethics committee. When she emerged the next morning disheveled, defiant, she found the vote already underway on residents' phones and emails. It was unanimous. She was out that evening. A neighborhood-wide email went out from the interim HOA president Jim Leland, a level-headed former Navy engineer who lived 3 doors down from Karen. It read: effective immediately, Karen Dufresne is removed from all HOA leadership roles. We apologize to residents and nearby landowners for the incidents that have caused division and confusion in recent weeks. We intend to foster a more respectful and lawful environment moving forward. The next day, Karen's house went up for sale. I watched from the barn as a moving truck pulled into her driveway. No one helped, no one waved, no one even looked up. Even Valor and Liberty seemed to stand taller. As if sensing the shift, Jake stopped by that afternoon, dropping off a bottle of bourbon with a lopsided grin. She's gone, he said, raising an imaginary toast. And the HOA board's talking about dropping some of the more ridiculous bylaws. You might have started a revolution, Marshall. I didn't start anything, I said. Karen did. I just finished it. We shared a drink on the porch, the pond glinting in the late sun. Peaceful again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about horses or ponds, or power-drunk suburbanites. It was about the quiet war between control and freedom, between people who think fences make order, and those who believe the land breathes better when left wild. Karen may have lost her crown, but the real victory was something greater. The land was free again. The weeks after Karen's departure were blissfully quiet. Gone were the passive-aggressive notices taped to my gate. No more drones buzzing over the pond like mechanical hornets. The HOA's new leadership quickly rolled back the more absurd policies banning livestock sounds, forbidding porch flags over 18 inches, and outlawing unapproved wildlife feeding, which apparently included birdseed. It felt like peace had returned to the land, but peace, I knew, was earned not gifted. Agent Miles returned to the ranch one morning, stepping out of the SUV with a crisp file folder tucked under his arm. He looked tired, but satisfied. "She's being formally charged," he said, handing me the paperwork. Federal trespassing, unauthorized surveillance of federal assets, and obstruction. I skimmed the pages. Karen's name was stamped in bold at the top. "She's negotiating a plea deal," he added. "But part of the agreement is a permanent restraining order. She's never to come within 500 yards of your property or the agent's horses again." I chuckled. "Should have made it 500 miles. He grinned. "Believe me, she won't risk another encounter. She's become something of a cautionary tale in suburban circles." As he climbed back into his vehicle, he paused. "We appreciate your cooperation. This could have gone south fast. You kept your cool." I gave a half smile. "I've seen worse desserts than this." He nodded. "Take care of those horses. We'll be back for them when the unit redeploys." I watched the SUV disappear down the long, dusty drive, then turned to the pasture where Valor and Liberty stood under the morning light, their coats gleaming bronze, their movements calm but purposeful. Even now, they carried an aura that didn't belong to ordinary animals. You could see it in how they scanned the ridges, how they planted their hooves before every step, trained, disciplined, and loyal. I wasn't sure I'd ever fully earn their trust, but they'd earned mine the day they became Karen's obsession and refused to flinch. Later that week, Briar Ridge held a community barbecue, a symbolic gesture to restore peace. Neighbors who'd once eyed me with suspicion now brought fresh pies and firm handshakes. Jake handled the grill, grinning like a man who'd just survived a siege. "Got your own chapter in HOA folklore now," he told me, flipping burgers. "You and those 2 horses. Folks are calling your place Fort Liberty." I laughed. "As long as they stop calling me the Pond Pirate." That night, as fireworks cracked across the open sky, I sat on the porch with my daughter Emma, who had come to visit from college. She leaned against my shoulder, sipping sweet tea. "I read about what happened," she said. "Karen sounds like a Disney villain." "She tried hard enough," I replied. "Even had the wardrobe." Emma laughed. "So what now? Going to run for HOA president?" "God, no," I said quickly. "Let the HOA fix itself. I've got fences to mend." She looked toward the pond. "You ever think about what it means having land that can't be taken? A home that stands when people try to erase it?" Her question hung in the air for a long time. I thought about my time overseas, about places where land was never safe, where homes crumbled with every gunshot or political shift. I thought about Karen's clipboard, her desperate grip on authority, and how powerless she became once people stood up to her. "This place," I finally said, "was built to outlast the noise. Doesn't mean we won't get more Karens. But now the neighborhood knows, some fences you don't cross." Emma nodded, thoughtful. "And some horses you don't mess with." The stars shimmered above us, and somewhere out by the pond, Valor whinnied a clear, proud sound that echoed across the hills like a trumpet in the distance. For the first time in months, everything felt still, not the kind of stillness that comes from fear, the kind that grows from hard-won freedom. And as the last firework faded from the sky, I realized something. This fight wasn't just for my land. It was for every person who ever stood on their porch, watched the world try to control what they built with their hands, and decided to say no. No to the Karens. No to the rules made by the fearful. No to the idea that ownership ends at the edge of someone else's opinion. Here, where hooves splash freely in the water and the wind carries no judgment, I found something stronger than revenge. I found peace, and I intended to keep it.